and now we're recording. So that was a close call. I like the part where he has daddy issues. Then you're gonna like the whole book then because it's a book about a guy with daddy issues trying to figure out how to raise his son. That's the plot of the book. So if you like that part, you're in for a good time. Chapter 3, Morning, Friday, October 31st. I woke up in the guest bedroom with no idea how I'd gotten there, but I didn't panic. I took this in stride because the guest room was something that had been happening with a regularity I hadn't found alarming yet. Victor was barking from somewhere inside the house, and the clock on the nightstand said 7:15. I groaned and pushed my face deep into a pillow. It was damp. I had been crying in my sleep again. But then sat up quickly, with the realization that I needed to prove something this morning. That I was responsible, that I wasn't an addict, that I was clean. But I couldn't rouse myself, because the hangover was intense and accompanied by its usual horniness. A painfully hard erection was sticking out of my boxers, which I stared at futilely, doing nothing with it. Finally, I was gazing at myself in the mirror of the guest bathroom. I had the dehydrated and haggard face of a man 10 years older, and my eyes were so red that you couldn't see the irises. I guzzled water from the tap and then decided to make myself halfway presentable by pulling off the t-shirt with the marijuana leaf on it and putting it back on inside out. Since I couldn't find my jeans, I tore the top sheet off the bed and draped myself in it. I walked out of the room a ghost. Trudging toward the kitchen, I passed the housekeeper, Rosa, vacuuming the living room, and I followed the large footprints that seemed to have been stamped in ash onto the beige carpeting, which this morning seemed shaggier and darker than normal. As the ghost padded through the living room, it stopped when it noticed the odd formation of the furniture. The sectional couch, the Le Corbusier chairs, and the Ames tables had been rearranged for the party, yet this new setup now seemed weirdly familiar to me. I wanted to figure out why, but the sound of the vacuum merging with Victor's barking forced the ghost to move quickly toward the kitchen. Excuse me. The house had been referred to as a McMansion in the Talk article. 9,000 square feet and situated in a fast-growing and wealthy suburb, and 307 Elsinore Lane wasn't even the grandest in the community. It merely reflected the routine affluence of the neighborhood. It was, according to a spread in El Decor, minimalist global eclectic with an emphasis on Spanish revival, but with elements of mid-century French chateau and a touch of 60s Palm Springs modernism. Imagine that if you can. It was not a design concept that everyone grasped. The interior was done in soothing shades of sandcastle and white corn, lily and bleached flower. Stately and lavish, slick and sparsely furnished, the house had 4 high-ceilinged bedrooms and a master suite that occupied half of the second story and included a fireplace, a wet bar, a refrigerator, 2 165-square-foot walk-in closets and window shades that disappeared into pockets in the ceiling, and each of the 2 adjoining bathrooms had a giant sunken tub. There was a fully equipped gym where I sometimes exercised half-heartedly, and where Jane's personal trainer, Klaus, helped sculpt her flawless body. And there was a sprawling media room with a plasma TV that had a screen the size of a small wall, and surround sound and hundreds of DVDs shelved alphabetically on either side of it, as well as a red felt antique pool table. And the house flowed. Large, carefully designed empty spaces merged seamlessly into one another to give the illusion that the house was far grander than it actually was. The ghost floated toward the kitchen, or family headquarters, that really was a marvel. All stainless steel and countertops made from Brazilian concrete, a thermidor range, a sub-zero refrigerator, 2 dishwashers, 2 stoves with noiseless fans, 2 sinks, a wine cooler, a drawer freezer, and an entire wall of sliding glass that overlooked an Olympic-sized swimming pool, without guardrails since Sarah and Robbie were already expert swimmers, and a jacuzzi with a vast, intensely green and lush lawn, which was bordered by a large and carefully maintained garden blooming with flowers I didn't know the names of, and beyond all that was the clearing and then the woods. The ghost saw no petty detritus cluttering the house, saw no party detritus cluttering the house. It was immaculate. Confused but impressed, the ghost stared at a vase of fresh tulips sitting in the center of the kitchen table. Marta was already up, fiddling with a Gaggia espresso maker as the chic, hung-over ghost wrapped in the fret sheet hovered around the kitchen, placing his burning forehead against the wine-cooling cabinet for one brief moment. The ghost bitterly noticed that it was empty, before falling into a chair at the giant round table on the far side of the room. Marta was a purposefully unattractive woman in her mid-30s whom Jane had befriended while shooting a movie in LA. She was loyal and discreet and handled all of Jane's business effortlessly, just one of the thousands of women from that town so attracted to celebrity and so devoted to its demands that she followed Jane across the country to these cold and unknown suburbs. Before Jane, she had worked for Penny Marshall, Meg Ryan, and briefly Julia Roberts, and she had the eerie ability to intuit whatever need or request a celebrity might have at any moment. Plus, the kids seemed responsive to her, which took a lot of pressure off their mother. Jane's trust in her was what gave Marta drive and ambition. It was what flattered her and gave her sustenance. This was as close as she was ever going to get to being famous herself, and Marta took the job seriously. But she seemed sad to me, since growing up in that world I had encountered hundreds of Martas, women and men so enslaved to the cause of celebrity that their own world was annihilated. She had a small apartment that Jane paid for in town. I didn't know where Rosa lived, only that her quiet Salvadorian father would pick her up from Elsinore Lane at 8 in the evening and bring her back the next morning at dawn. The ghost needed coffee. And suddenly Marta was setting an Hermes... I hate this. I hate all these fucking brand names. An Hermes chain d'Anker china cup filled with steamy, milky espresso in front of him, and the ghost mumbled his thanks as she went over to the wiring juice extractor and started squeezing oranges. Strung out, the ghost stared at the copper pans hanging from a rack above the island in the middle of the kitchen, morosely sipping his coffee as his eyes shifted to the Daily Variety already sitting on top of a pile that included the New York Times, the calendar section from the Los Angeles Times, and the Hollywood Reporter. Hearing voices from upstairs, I breathed in deeply as I reached for our local paper, preparing myself, because I was still, even without a hangover, having trouble adjusting to the schedules everyone inhabiting the house maintained. So after Marta left the kitchen to get Sarah, who was practicing a second language on flashcards, I roused myself and poured a large glass of freshly squeezed OJ, and dosed it with a half-empty bottle of Ketel 1 left over from the party and neatly hidden among all the olive oil at the end of the counter. It was a small miracle no one had gotten rid of it. I sipped the cocktail carefully and returned to the table. The newspapers kept stoking my fear. New surveys provided awful statistics on just about everything. Evidence suggested that we were not doing well. Researchers gloomily agreed. Environmental psychologists were interviewed. Damage had unwittingly been done. There were feared lapses. There were misconceptions about potential. Situations had deteriorated. Cruelty was on the rise, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. The populace was confounded, yet didn't care. Unpublished studies hinted that we were all paying a price. Scientists peered into data and concluded that we should all be very worried. No one knew what normal behavior was anymore, and some argued that this was a form of virtue, and no one argued back. No one challenged anything. Anxiety was soaking up most people's days. Everyone had become preoccupied with horror. Madness was fluttering everywhere. There was 50 years of research supporting this data. There were diagrams illustrating all these problems, circles and hexagons and squares, different sections colored in lime or lilac or gray. Most troubling were the fleeting signs that nothing could transform any of this into something positive. You couldn't help being both afraid and fascinated. Reading these articles made you feel that the survival of mankind didn't seem very important in the long run. We were doomed. We deserved it. I was so tired. What worried Jane besides the upcoming reshoots? The kids were mimicking our facial expressions, which for the last month had consisted of hassled grimaces. And so many children were missing that it bordered on an epidemic. About a dozen boys had disappeared since I arrived in July. Only boys. Their photos were flashed on the internet, and updates were posted on special websites devoted to them, their solemn faces staring out at you, their shadows following you everywhere. I read about another missing Boy Scout, the third in the last year. This boy, too, was Robbie's age, and his witless angelic face now graced the front page of the newspaper. But none of these children had been found. No bodies discovered in the ravine or in the concrete drain pipe, no remains on the dry creek bed or in the suspicious duffel bag tossed off the turnpike, nothing lying naked and defiled in the woods. These boys had vanished without a trace, and there were no hints that any of them was ever coming back. Investigators were on frantic searches. Parents of the missing boys were urged to appear on CNN and humanize their child in case the abductors were watching. Except for increasing ratings, these news conferences accomplished nothing beyond serving as a reminder of the incidental malice of the universe, courtesy of Time. Excuse me. This publicity was supposed to mobilize volunteers, but people were giving up hope. So many boys were missing. People had simply become alienated and longed for a lesser horror to take this one's place. There were candlelight vigils where families linked hands and lowered their heads, grief-stricken and praying, though to me they more often resembled participants in a seance. Various organizations proposed plaques to memorialize the lost. Students at Buckley, the private school Robbie and Sarah attended, were encouraged to email condolences to the bereaved parents. We were supposed to rehearse our children on the usual tired litany. Don't talk to strangers, ignore the well-dressed, soft-spoken man looking for help to find his puppy, yell and tell, and rehearse a route, and avoid the clown. Distrust everybody, was the message. Everywhere people heard the sound of children weeping. Silly putty was used in school classes for squeezing out tension. We were advised to always keep recent photographs of our children on hand. And now the missing Boy Scout inevitably provoked the flicker of worry I experienced every morning before Robbie and Sarah went off to school, especially if the hangover was bad or I'd had too much coffee. This wide-awake nightmare lasted no more than 30 seconds, a rapid montage that nonetheless required a Klonopin. A rampage at the school, I'm so scared being whispered over the cell phone, what sounds like firecrackers popping off in the background, the ricocheting bullet that hurls the second grader to the floor, the random firing in the library, the blood sprayed over an unfinished exam, the red pools of it forming on the linoleum, the desk splattered with viscera, a wounded teacher ushering dazed children out of the cafeteria, the custodian shot in the back, the girl murmuring, I think I've been hit, before she faints, the CNN vans arriving, the stuttering sheriff at the emergency press conference, the bulletins flashing on the TV screens, the concerned anchorman offering updates, the helicopters hovering, the final moments when the gunman places the magnum in his mouth, the overcrowded hospital emergency rooms and the gymnasiums transformed into makeshift morgues, the yellow crime tape ribboned around an entire playground, and then, in the aftermath, the .22 rifle missing from the stepfather's cabinet, the journal recounting the boy's rejection and despair, a boy who took the teasing hard, the boy who had nothing to lose, the Ellaville that didn't take hold, or the bipolar disorder not detected, the book on witchcraft found beneath the bed, the axe carved into his chest in the attempted suicide the month before, the broken hand from punching a wall, the nights laying in bed counting to 1,000, the pet rabbit found later in the afternoon hanged from a hook in a small closet, and, finally, the closing images of the endless coverage, the flag at half-staff, the memorial services, the hundreds of bouquets and candles and toys that filled the steps leading up to the school, the bloody hand of a victim on the cover of Newsweek, the questions asked, the simple shrugs, the civil suits filed, the copycats, the reasons you quit praying. Still, the worst news comes out of your own child's mouth. But he was normal, Dad. He was just like me. Though I hadn't realized it, Jane had walked into the kitchen without saying anything, to the sniffling blob wrapped in a sheet hunched over the table. She was standing over the stove waiting for a pot of water to boil. She was making oatmeal for the kids. Her back to me. I tried to translate her body language and I failed. I zoned out again on the countertop specifically designed for the placement of olive oil bottles. Victor soon shuffled in. The dog stared at me. You bore me, it was thinking. Go ahead. Make my day, it was thinking. Why does that very rude golden retriever bark all night long? I asked, glaring back at the dog. Maybe because he got freaked out by the sight of your 19-year-old student screwing in our garage, Jane said, immediately, without turning around. Maybe because Jay McHenry was skinny dipping in our pool. It doesn't sound like the Jayster, I said, tentatively. Someone had to haul him out after you disappeared, she said, with Annette. Shoutouts to Annette, by the way. Who's Annette? He said. I didn't. I, that was organic. I hadn't looked ahead. I'm sorry. Who's Annette? I realized something. Oh, what net? I asked flippantly. We don't own a net. Worried pause. Do we? I looked around, but you were already passed out in the guest room. She said this with a fake nonchalance she had been developing since I moved into the house. I sighed. I did not pass out, Jane. I was exhausted. Why, Brett? Why were you so exhausted? She asked, her voice now clenched. I sipped my drink. Well, that dog's been doing its big barking routine and begging for attention the entire week. You know, honey, this happened to coincide with me starting my novel, and so it's extremely distracting and suspicious. Yes, I know. Victor doesn't want you to write another book, Jane said, turning off the stove and moving toward the sink. I'm so with you on that one. I never see that dog frolic, I muttered. He's been depressed ever since I moved in, and I never see him frolic. Well, when you kicked him out the other night. Hey! He was trying to eat a stick of butter, I exclaimed, sitting up. He was going after that loaf of cornbread on the counter. Why are we talking about the dog? She snapped, finally facing me. After a contained silence, I sipped my juice again and cleared my throat. So, you want to read me my rights? I sighed. Why bother? She said tightly, turning away. You're still in a coma. I suppose we'll be discussing this in couples counseling. She said nothing. I decided to change the topic, hoping for a softer reaction. So who's that guy who came as Patrick Bateman last night? I asked. The guy in the Armani suit with all the fake blood on it? I've no idea. A student of yours? One of your legions of fans? Why do you care? I I didn't recognize him, I murmured. I thought... You thought what? That I knew him? Never mind. I shut up and thought about things for a moment or two. And did you ever figure out what happened in Sarah's room? I asked gently. Because, Jane, I think maybe she did it. I paused for emphasis. But she told me her doll did it. That bird thing, the Derby I bought her last summer. And, that's pretty worrisome. And by the way, where was Marta when this so-called attack happened? I think that's pretty... Jane whirled towards me. Why are you avoiding the fact that maybe one of your drunk, fucked up students did it? My students had better things to do last night than ransack our daughters. Yeah, like fuck in our shower. I have no idea who they were, and snort coke off the countertop in the kitchen. She was still glaring at me, hands on her hips. A long pause, in which I built to an outraged, people were in the kitchen last night? Yeah, people were doing drugs in the kitchen, Brett. She recited this line in her hip-wary mode. Honey, look, drugs may have been done, but I'm sure they were consumed quietly and with discretion. I paused helplessly. And I know you were doing them too. Something caught in her throat. The sarcasm evaporated, and she turned away from me again. She bowed her head. I noticed one hand was curled tightly into a fist. I could hear the erratic breathing that comes before tears. You mean I used to be doing them? I said softly. That sentence should be in past tense. I paused. I'm up, aren't I? Barely, she muttered. You're a wreck. Look! I made a useless gesture. I'm sipping juice and scanning the papers. She suddenly composed herself. Oh, forget it, forget it, forget it. And why are you up calling Jay's wife and asking, I wouldn't have to call Helen if you weren't using again, she said in a loud, anguished voice. She stopped and took a series of deep breaths to calm herself down. I can't do this now. I can't do this now. Let's just forget it. That sounds reasonable, I murmured gently, turning back to the papers. I attempted a long gulp from my glass, but juice flushed over the rim, so I gave up and put it down on the table with a shaking hand. Outraged by my casual tone, Jane whirled around again. It is illegal, Brett. Just because it was consumed in our house, a private residence, I shouted back, doesn't make it any more legal. Well, it isn't technically legal, but... She waited for me to finish that sentence. I chose not to. I didn't do drugs last night, Jane. That's a lie, she broke down. You're lying to me, and I don't know what to do about it. With great effort, the ghost stood up and shuffled over to her. The ghost wrapped itself around her, and she let him. She was shaking, and between sobs was the trembling intake of uneven breaths. How about you believe me, and... I turned her around so we were facing each other, and I stared at her pleadingly, my eyes sad and wistful. Just love me. There was a new silence in the kitchen. I glanced over at the dog as Jane collapsed into me, hugging so tightly that I started to wheeze. Victor was staring at me. You bore me, it was thinking. You are a jerk, it was thinking. I glared until he lost interest, licked a paw, and then turned away. He couldn't stand the sight of me, and he knew that I knew it. And he liked that I knew it. That's what drove me crazy. The dog knew that the dog knew that I knew it hated me and liked it. When I looked back at Jane, she was staring at me so hopefully that her expression almost bordered on madness, and I wanted to let go first. But then Jane gently pushed me away and simply said, "We're having dinner at the Allens on Sunday." I couldn't get out of it. That sounds like fun. Really fun. After she left to get Robbie, my stomach erupted, and leaving my cocktail on the table, I hurriedly ran into the closest bathroom and sat down on the toilet just as an explosive torrent of diarrhea hit the water. Gasping, I reached for the latest issue of Wallpaper and flipped through it while my stomach kept emptying itself. I stared at another sunken tub, and then out the small bay window as Elsinore Lane began waking up. And I saw the boy who spent the night walk from our house, the pumpkins still dotting the path, to the house next to ours and realized he was Ashton Allen. He was momentarily so close to the window that I could see his t-shirt. Keep staring, I might do a trick. And then a sparrow landed on the sill and I turned away. The bathroom was soon enveloped in an odor particular to the remnants of a drunken night. The smell of excrement and alcohol commingled in a rancid stench that forced me out of the bathroom almost as quickly as I had rushed in. When I hobbled back into the kitchen, Jane was pouring hot water into ceramic bowls, and Robbie was standing at the table, drinking from my glass, grimacing. "Mom, this orange juice tastes funny. Is there any Tropicana left?" "Robbie, hon, I don't want you drinking Tropicana," Jane said. "Marta squeezed some fresh juice for you. It's by the sink." "This is fresh juice," he muttered. "I want to see the sparrow go back." I stood in the doorway until Robbie put the glass down and moved over to the juicer. Non-fresh juice was largely prohibited because it caused cavities and obesity. As I made my way to the table, Robbie turned around and saw me and did the subtlest double take before casually moving over to his backpack, which he was in the process of rearranging. Robbie still didn't seem used to my presence, but I wasn't used to his either. We were both scared and wary of each other, and I was the one who needed to make a connection, to mend us, but his reluctance, as loud and insistent as an anthem, seemed impossible to overcome. There was no way of winning him over. I had failed him utterly. His downward gaze whenever I entered a room reminded me of this. And yet I still resented the fact that he, not myself, lacked the courage to make the first move. "Hey, kid," I said, sitting down at the table and chugging the rest of the screwdriver. It went down sourly, and I shut my eyes until the alcohol's warmth began coursing through my system, causing my eyelids to flutter open. Robbie mumbled a response. It was enough. School lasted from 8:15 until 3:15, and various after-school programs often pushed their return to 5:15, so there was usually 9 hours of peace. But then I realized tonight was trick-or-treating, and that I had to be at the college by noon, a counseling day, but mostly an excuse to see Amy Light. And then I had an appointment with my shrink, Dr. Kim, and somewhere during this ordeal, a lot of Xanax was going to have to be ingested and a nap taken. The housekeeper walked in and said something to Jane in Spanish. They had a little conversation I couldn't possibly follow until Rosa nodded intensely and moved out of the kitchen. Since it was Halloween and a free dress day at school, Robbie was wearing a "What? Me worry?" t-shirt and oversized cargo pants. His clothes were always too big, too baggy, and everything had a label on it. A pair of roller blades were slung over his shoulder, and he let Jane know that he'd just downloaded something from a Buffy the Vampire Slayer website, and he was wondering how to fit a soccer ball into a new Targus Rec Gear Kip Flick backpack, which weighed an acceptable 25 pounds. The Nike Bio KNX had caused spinal aching, according to his physician. He was holding a magazine, Game Pro, to read on the car ride to school, and was anxious about an oral quiz on the formation of waterfalls. As I flipped through the papers, Robbie complained about noises last night after the party was over, but he was unsure where they were coming from. The attic, or maybe on the roof, but also definitely on the sides of the house. There were scratching sounds at his door, he said, and when he woke up this morning his furniture had been rearranged, and he found 3 or 4 deep grooves on the bottom of his door, which he insisted he didn't make. And when he touched the doorknob it was wet. "Someone slimed it," he said, shuddering. I looked up from the paper and saw Jane glaring at me while she asked, "What do you mean, hun?" But as usual, when Robbie was asked for specifics, he drooped and went silent. I reanimated myself and tried to think of a question to ask him that would not require any elaboration, but then Sarah and Marta wandered in. Sarah was wearing a frilly t-shirt with the word lingerie in spangly silver letters. And then Victor bounded up to her, relieved and wiggling with happiness, before moving to the glass wall and staring intently into the backyard while barking like mad, causing my head to explode. "Sit, Victor! Heel! Heel!" I demanded. "Geez, can't somebody get that dog to mellow out?" I turned back to the papers, but Sarah was leaning into me with the Christmas list she'd already made, a Pokemon Stadium leading a long computer-sized column. I reminded her that it was October. This didn't register. And then I started going down the list with her until I looked to Jane for help. But she was on her cell phone and bagging the kids' lunches, the sugar-free graham crackers, the bottles of Diet Snapple, while saying things like, "No, the kids are booked solid." Sarah kept explaining to me what each item on the list meant to her until I casually interrupted. "How's everything with Turby, honey?" I asked. Had I really been so afraid of it last night? Everything seemed different now in the light of the morning. Bright, clean, sane. "Turby's okay," is all she said, but it worked. She forgot about the Christmas list and moved over to finger paintings she'd made yesterday for show and tell, and carefully started sliding them into a manila envelope. Robbie was checking his Palm Pilot while swaggering around the kitchen, his way of acting tough. I suddenly noticed a paperback of Lord of the Flies and the massive school gear on the table and picked it up. Opening the cover, I was shocked to find Sarah's name handwritten in the front page. "Wait a minute," I said. "Can't believe they're letting first graders read this." Everyone except Sarah glanced at me. "I don't even understand this book now. Geez, why don't they just assign her Moby Dick? This is absurd. This is crazy." I was waving the book at Jane when I noticed Sarah staring at me with a confused expression. I bent toward her and said in a calm, soothing, rational tone, "Honey, you don't need to read this." Sarah glanced fearfully at her mother. "It's on our reading list," she said quietly. Exasperated, I asked Robbie to show me his curriculum. "My what?" he asked, standing rigidly still. "Your schedule, dummy." Robbie tentatively rummaged through his backpack and pulled out a crumpled computerized list. Art history, algebra 1, science, basic probability, phys ed, statistics, non-fictional literature, social studies, and conversational Spanish. I stared at the list dully until he sat down at the table, and I handed it back to him. "This is insane," I muttered. "It's outrageous. Where are we sending them?" Robbie suddenly concentrated on his bowl of muesli, having pushed aside the oatmeal Marta had placed in front of him, and reached for a carton of soy milk. Jane kept forgetting that Robbie couldn't stand oatmeal, but it was something I always remembered, since I couldn't stand oatmeal either. He finally shrugged. "It's okay." "The school counselor said that getting a child into an Ivy League school starts in first grade," Jane said casually, as if not to alarm the children, who I assumed weren't listening anyway. "Actually, earlier," Marta reminded her. "She's hyping you, baby," I sighed. "Don't play that game, sister." Robbie suddenly giggled, much to my gratification. Jane scowled. "Don't use fake rap talk around the kids. I hate it." Coward. I can stand oatmeal. Yeah, me too. I like oatmeal. "And I hated that counselor," I said. "You know why? She was feeding off your anxiety, baby." "Let's not have this conversation now," Jane said, washing her hands in the sink, her neck muscles taut. "Are we almost ready, kids?" I was still dumbfounded by Robbie's schedule, and I wanted to say something consoling to him, but he had finished the muesli and was reloading his backpack. He studied a computer game, Quake 3, as if he didn't know what to do with it, and then pulled out his cell phone to make sure it was charged. "Hey, buddy, what are you doing taking a cell phone to school?" He looked nervously over at Jane, who was now drying her hands with a paper towel. "All the kids have them," she said simply. "It's abnormal for 11-year-olds to have cell phones, Jane," I said, hitting what I hoped was the right tone of indignation. "You are wearing a sheet," Jane said. This was her response. Robbie seemed lost, as if he didn't know what to do. Finally, thankfully, Sarah broke the silence. "Mommy, I brushed my teeth," she offered. "But don't you brush after eating, honey?" Jane asked, pointing out something to Marta in her datebook concerning the trip to Toronto next week for the reshoots. "I think you should brush your teeth after breakfast." "I brush my teeth," Sarah said again, and when that got no response from Jane, she turned to me. "Brett, I know the alphabet." "Well, you should by now," I said encouragingly, but also confused about why a girl so proud of having learned the alphabet should be reading Lord of the Flies. "I know the alphabet," she said proudly. "A, B, C, D, E, F." "Honey, Brett has a big headache. I'm going to take your word on this one. G, H, I, K, L, M, N. You can identify the sounds letters make. Sweetie, that's really excellent. Jane, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V. Jane, would you please give her a sugar-free donut or something?" I touched my head to indicate migraine approaching. "Really?" "And I know what a rhombus is," Sarah shouted gleefully. "Fabulous. And a hexagon." "Okay, but take pity on me just now, Munchkin." "And a trapezoid." "Honey, Daddy's grouchy and sleepy and about to throw up, so could you keep it down a little?" She immediately turned to Jane. "Mommy, I'm keeping a journal," she announced, "and Turby's helping me with it." "Maybe Brett can get a little help from Turby with his writing," Jane offered caustically, without looking up from the notes she was going over with Marta. "Baby, my novel is so happening right now I can hardly believe it myself," I droned, flipping through USA Sports section. "But Turby's sad," Sarah said, pouting. "What? I thought he was doing okay," I said, partially disinterested. "Is he having a bad fur day?" "He says you don't like him," Sarah said, twisting in her chair. "He says you never play with him." "The thing is lying. I play with him all the time, while you're at school. In fact, Turby beat me at backgammon on Tuesday. Don't believe a thing Turby—" "Brett," Jane snapped. "Stop it." "Mommy," Sarah asked, "does Daddy have a cold?" "Honey, your daddy's contaminated right now," Jane said, placing a bowl of oatmeal topped with raspberries in front of Sarah. "And Mommy's all bitched up," I muttered. Jane either didn't hear me or pretended to ignore that one. "And we'll all be late if we don't hurry." And then I zoned out on everything surrounding me until I heard Jane say, "You'll have to ask your dad." When I snapped out of it, Robbie was looking at me anxiously. "Forget it," he mumbled. "No, come on," I said. "Ask me what?" His face was so troubled that I wished I knew the question myself and could simply answer it without Robbie having to ask it. Dreading this, he asked, "Can we get the Matrix DVD?" Quickly I thought this through. He braced himself for my answer. "But we already have it on video," I said, slowly, as if answering a trick question. "Yeah, but the DVD has extras and—" "Of what? Keanu—" "Brett," Jane said, interrupting her discussion of Sarah's ballet schedule with Marta, and then turned on Robbie. "Why are you wearing that t-shirt?" she suddenly asked him. "What's wrong with it?" I interjected, trying to save myself. "We can't wear costumes to school, remember?" Robbie darkly muttered. "Remember?" he asked accusingly. He was referring to the email sent out to parents about Halloween this year. Even though there would be parties in the afternoon, the school was warning against costumes, preferring that kids come as themselves. The school originally had okayed appropriate costumes while actively discouraging anything inappropriate, nothing violent or scary or with weapons. But predictably, the children, even on all their meds, started to freak out en masse, so costumes were simply banned. Exhausted parents pleaded for a compromise, nominally frightening, which was rejected. This disappointed Robbie gravely, so while Jane was inspecting glasses that had just been in the dishwasher, I tried to console my son. In a fatherly way, I assured him that going without a costume was probably in everyone's best interest, offering as a cautionary tale my own 7th grade Halloween, when I'd gone to school as the bloody vampire and wasn't allowed to march in the annual parade for the elementary students because I had slathered so much fun blood on my mouth and chin and cheeks that it was certain to frighten them, according to the principal. This had been so deeply embarrassing, a pivotal moment really, that it was the last time I ever wore a costume. It was that shameful. The memory of sitting alone on a bench while my classmates marched in front of the delighted elementary students still burned. I suddenly expected Robbie to find me far more interesting than he previously had. An awkward silence filled the kitchen. People had been listening to my story. Jane was holding a cracked margarita glass and staring at me strangely. I slowly noticed that everyone else, Sarah, Marta, Robbie, even Victor, was also staring at me strangely. Robbie, looking completely confused, finally spoke, quietly, and with as much dignity as he could muster. Who said I wanted to go as the bloody vampire? He paused. I wanted to go as Eminem, Brett. Just because your father was a total freak at your age doesn't mean you are, honey, Jane said. The bloody vampire? Robbie stared at me, aghast. I looked helplessly at Jane, whose face now suddenly relaxed. She studied me for a longish moment, trying to figure something out. Yeah? I asked her, as I slowly handed Robbie a $50 bill. I just realized something I wanted to ask you, Jane said. What is it? The dog became interested in my answer. It gave me a quick sideways glance. Have you ever had to empty a dishwasher? I'm just curious. Uh, Jane. The loaded dishwasher sounded like another in a long series of loaded insinuations. The strange guilt I felt, the sense of having done something wrong, never left me in that house. I tried to appear quiet and thoughtful, instead of my only other option, fainting in pain and defeat. Well? She was still waiting for an answer. Uh, no, but I am seeing Dr. Kim today. I imagined relief filling the kitchen in a great oceanic wave. I wanted badly for breakfast to end. I closed my eyes and wished it, and for everyone in the house to slip quietly away. And then they did. End of chapter 3. And I drank like a lot of water during that chapter, so I need to go pee and fill up my water bottle. I'll be right back. Oh, we don't have any, we're not listening to anything, are we? I totally forgot. What were we even listening to last time? Did it have the word suburb in it? Yeah, it was this. Why is it so quiet? Is that coming through? I'll even turn it up a little. Oh, it's way quiet. Okay, you should be able to just barely hear it now. Okay, I'll be right back. It is pathetic. I think that I would prefer it if this was the dynamic that Family Guy was about. This was the family. He really is the Family Guy. I would have watched that show if it was about these characters. I love Sarah. Sarah is my favorite character in this book. Every time Sarah opens her mouth in this book, I feel like it's it's just a joy. It's just wonderful. All right, let's do it. Chapter 4: The Novel. I had started the outline for Teenage Pussy over the summer, and a lot had been accomplished despite the hours playing Tetris on my gateway and constantly checking emails and rearranging the endless shelves of foreign editions that lined the walls of my office. Today's interference, I needed to come up with a quote for a banal and harmless book written by an acquaintance of mine in New York. Yet another mediocre, polite novel, The Millipede's Lament, that was bound to get a spate of respectful reviews and then be totally forgotten. The quote I ultimately devised was glib and evasive, a string of words so non-specific that they probably could have applied to just about anything. I don't think I've probably come upon a work so resolutely about itself in years. And then I turned to a short story by one of my students from the writing class and quickly went through it. In the margins I wrote question marks, I circled words, I underlined sentences, I corrected grammar. I felt I made some balanced decisions. Before resuming work on Teenage Pussy, I went through my emails. There were only two. One was from Buckley, something about a parent-teacher night next week, with a pointed P.S. from the principal noting that Jade and I had failed to make the one in early September. And then I sighed when I saw where the other email came from. The Sherman Oaks branch of the Bank of America, and when it was sent, 2:40 a.m. I sighed again and clicked on it, and as usual was faced with a blank screen. I had been receiving these emails since the beginning of October, unaccompanied by any explanation or demand. I had called the bank several times, since I had an account at the branch where my father's ashes were still stored in the safe deposit box, but the bank had no record of these sent emails and patiently explained that no one could possibly be working at that hour, i.e. the middle of the night. Frustrated, I let it go, and the emails kept coming with a frequency that I simply became used to. But today, I scrolled through my filing cabinet until I found the first one, October 3rd at 2:40 a.m. The date seemed familiar, as did the time, but I couldn't figure out why. Annoyed at my inability to piece this together, I clicked off AOL and eagerly went to the Teenage Pussy file. It's not a good sentence out of context. The original title of Teenage Pussy had been Holy Shit, but Knopf, who'd shelled out close to $1 million for the North American rights alone, assured me that Teenage Pussy was a more commercial title. Outrageous Mike was considered briefly, but finally deemed, quote, non-controversial. Knopf was going to call it a pornographic thriller in their catalog, which excited me immensely, and told me privately that Alfred and Blanche Knopf would be rolling over in their graves when the thing was published. Since I realized I was creating an entirely new genre, my bout of writer's block had vanished, and I was working on the book daily, even though it was still only in the outline stage. The book was the story of Michael Graves and this young, hip Manhattan bachelor's erotic life. A, quote, guy who loves to give love and loves to get loved back, is what I promised my publishers, and I had envisioned a narrative that was elegantly hardcore and interspersed with jaunty bouts of my trademark laconic humor. It was going to contain at least 100 sex scenes. I mean, Jesus, why not? I guffawed to my editor over lunch in the bar at Patroon while he idly checked his blood sugar. And you could read the novel as either a satire on the new sexual obnoxiousness, or as the simple story of an average guy who enjoys defiling women with his lust. I was going to turn people on and make them think and laugh. That was the combo. Scatological humor intended and achieved. That was the plan. It seemed like a good one. Teenage Pussy would contain endless episodes of girls storming out of rooms in high-rise condos, and the transcripts of cell phone conversations fraught with tension, and camera crews following the main characters around, as well as 6 or 7 overdoses, attempts on the girls' part to win our Lothario's attention. There would be thousands of cosmopolitans ordered, and characters camcording each other having anal sex, and real-life porn stars making guest appearances. It was going to make Sodomania look like A Bug's Life. Chapters were titled The Facial, The Silicone Queen, The Porta-John, The Intrepid Threesome, Her Boobage, The Clitorati, The Gateway, Hairy Pinkish Tacos, Am I Too Big for You? You know, I really don't want a girlfriend right now. And look, I have to catch an early flight, okay? Hey, did you get a chance to pick up my dry cleaning? I'm probably going to be quite distant now. And finally, do you mind if I just jack off? Our hero, who calls himself the Sexpert, dates only models and carries around a large bag filled with various lubricants, Benoit balls, vibrating clitoral stimulators, and about a dozen strings of anal beads. Every girl he meets he makes wet with excitement. He has the cute habit of licking their faces in public and fingering them beneath tables at Balthazar while drugging their gimlets with Oxycontin. He fucks one girl so hard that he breaks her pelvic bone. He fucks a semi-famous TV actress in the green room minutes before she's supposed to appear on Live with Regis and Kelly. He flashes his biceps and shows off his washboard abs. Michael didn't have a six-pack. He had a 24-pack, a case, to anyone who might look. Women keep pleading with him to be more open and emotional, and they indignantly throw out lines like, I am not a slut, and you never want to talk about anything, and we should have gotten a room, and that was rude, and no, I will not watch you have sex with that I will not have sex with that homeless man while you watch. As well as my two favorites, you tricked me, and I'm calling the police. His usual answers. Swallowing is about communication, baby. And, okay, I'm sorry, but can I still come on your face? A lot of his bad behavior is excused, because in many respects Mike isn't innocent, though it's far more likely that forgiveness is always extended, because he makes every girl he fucks multi-orgasmic. But many women become so upset by this behavior that they have to be tranquilized before returning to their, quote, lesbian pasts. And then there's the scandal involving videos Mike had made while having sex with various older married women that suspiciously started surfacing on the internet. What, you're gonna fuck your way through life? One of these older women, the wife of a wealthy industrialist, shouts at him. He stares at her as if she's a ditz, then forces a gas mask onto her head. He also invents a variety of cocktails, including the bareback, the crotchless panty, the raging boner, the weenus, the double penetration, the shag man, and the jizz bag. His most recent conquest is, hence the title, a particularly vapid 16-year-old who thinks you can get pregnant from oral sex and contract AIDS from drinking a Snapple. She also talks to birds and has a pet squirrel named Corky, as well as a problem with silverware. At restaurants, when the waiter recites the specials, she always has to interrupt by asking oh so slowly, do you have to use a fork to eat that? But Mike finds her innocence alluring and soon initiates her into this world, a place where he makes her wear flimsy clothes, transparent lace thongs are high on his list, and has her say, throw me a bone before they have sex, and who's my daddy, once he's penetrated her. He applies cocaine to her clitoris. He forces her to read Milan Kundera paperbacks and makes her watch Jeopardy! They fly to LA for an orgy at the Chateau Marmont and buy sex toys at the Hustler Boutique on Sunset Boulevard and pile them into the trunk of his rented black Cadillac Escalade SUV while she giggles amply. He even charms her father, who had threatened to personally kick our hero's nicely shaved ass if he didn't stop dating his underage daughter. In a very tender moment, Mike buys her a fake ID. She doesn't mean to be that stupid. He always apologizes to his aggravated friends, other bachelors living in the same lost world as Mike's. One night he gets her so high on mushrooms that she is unable to locate her own vagina. But beyond all this riotousness is the tragic ex-girlfriend who has done so much cocaine her face has caved in on itself. You damned Russian whore, Mike screams at her in despair. And there are rooms filled with dead flowers, and Mike loses almost all of his trust fund at the Hard Rock Casino in Las Vegas, and then attends yet another orgy, this one in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, not Colonial, that descends into, quote, utter depravity, and the novel ends sadly with an abortion and a tense Valentine's Day dinner at Nello, a powerful scene. How could you do that to me? Is the novel's last line. The book was all about the hard sell. The $1 million advance guaranteed that. But it was also going to be poignant and quietly devastating and put every other book written by my generation to shame. I would still be enjoying huge success and notoriety while my better behaved peers were languishing on Where Are They Now websites. Today I was going through a list of all the sex injuries Mike was going to endure. Rug burn on knees, back clawed until bleeding, intense muscle cramps, ruptured testicles, testicular hickeys, broken blood vessels, bruises due to excessive suction, a penile fracture. There was a loud pop, then excruciating pain, but Tandra wrapped crushed ice in a Ralph Lauren towel and drove Mike to the ER. And finally, just general dehydration. The phone rang, my line lit up, and I screened the call while staring into the computer. It was Binky, my agent. I picked up immediately. How's my favorite author? Oh, I bet you say that to all your authors. In fact, I know you do. Actually, I do, but please don't tell any of them. I promise. But it means something to hear you say it nevertheless. In fact, one of my favorite authors called me today. And who might that have been? It was Jay. Binky paused. He said you had quite the blowout last night. A kick-ass party indeed. I also paused, realizing something. And don't believe anything Jay tells you. Indeed, she said ominously. By the way, did you get that big royalty check for American Psycho from the Brits? I had it transferred to your New York account. Yes, I got the statement. Excellent. I did my Monty Burns. That was my Monty Burns, by the way. I was definitely ready for that. I definitely had that. I definitely had read ahead enough to know that that was how I was supposed to read that. How's Jane? How are the kids? She paused, then said blankly, Can't believe I just asked you that. I've known you for over 15 years, and never thought I would ask you a question like that. I am now a committed father and a husband, I said proudly. Yes, Binky murmured hesitantly. Yes. I snapped her out of disbelief. And I'm teaching. Unbelievable. It's just one day a week at the college, but the kids love me. Legend has it, more students tried to enroll in my writing class than for any other visiting writer who ever taught there. Or so I'm told. How many students do you have? Well, I only wanted 3, but the administration said that wasn't an acceptable number. I breathed in. So I have 15 of the little bastards. And how's the book going? Binky asked. Oh, so much for pleasantries? Those were pleasantries? I'm almost done with the outline, and the book is moving along right on schedule. I needed a cigarette and started looking through my drawers to find a pack. I am no longer sweating the small stuff, Binky. Well, would you have time for a detour? But this is an obsolete title for next fall, which means I need to finish it by January, no? Well, Brett, you were the one who said you could write this thing in 6 months, she said. No one believed it, but that due date's in your contract, and the Germans running your publishing house are displeased by extensions. You're sounding coy, Binky, I said, giving up on the cigarette. You're sounding very coy, and I like it. And you sound like your allergies are acting up, Binky said flatly. I have a feeling we didn't take our Claritin today, and I don't like it. My allergies are acting up like mad, I protested, and then thought it through. And don't believe anything Jay tells you. Seriously, Brett, allergies? Do not mock my allergies. My nose is stuffed up, and I'm exceedingly wheezy because of them. I paused, knowing this wasn't very convincing. Hey, I actually do yoga, and I have a Pilates trainer. How's that for rehabilitation? She let it go with a sigh. Have you ever heard of Harrison Ford? The very famous and once popular actor? He liked the polish you did on, much to my chagrin, and wants to talk to you about writing something. You have to go out there and meet with him and his people in a couple of weeks. Just for a day or two. She sighed again. I'm not sure if it's such a great idea at this point. I'm just relaying the information. And you did it so well. I paused. But why can't they come here? I live in a perfectly nice town. A longer pause. Hello? Hello? You'd have to go out just for a day or two. What's this thing about? Something about Cambodia or Cuba. It's all very vague. I suppose they want me, the writer, to figure it out, huh? I asked indignantly. Jesus. I'm just relaying the info, Brett. As long as Keanu Reeves is not co-starring, I would be more than delighted to take a meeting with Harrison. Then I remembered certain stories I'd heard. But isn't he supposed to be this giant blowhard? That's why I think it would be a perfect match. Pinky, what does that mean? Listen, I've got to run. It's the day from hell. In the background, I heard an assistant calling out. I'll tell them you're interested and you can start figuring out the dates you can be in LA. Well, thank you very much for the call. I love our mock formality. Oh, by the way. Yeah? Happy Halloween. And as we hung up, I suddenly realized what had been bothering me about the emails that were coming from the Bank of America in Sherman Oaks. October 3rd. That was my father's birthday. And that segged into another realization. 2:40 a.m. That was when, according to the coroner, he had died. I pondered this for about a minute. It was a disturbing connection. But I was hungover and exhausted, and I needed to be on campus in 30 minutes, so maybe it was just a coincidence, and maybe I was giving it more significance than it deserved. When I got up to leave the office, I noticed one more thing. The furniture had been rearranged. My desk was now facing the wall instead of the window, where the couch had been repositioned instead. A lamp had been moved to a different corner. Again, at that moment, I blamed it on the party, as I did everything else that day. End of chapter 4. Wow, that rising fly tone feeling like the Ring. Girl, that's a lawnmower. Yeah. I have another one in me. Let's check the length of it. Yeah, it's a little annoying though. We can find a new thing to listen to. Let me see. Okay, this next chapter's not too long. We can do this one. Find some less annoying backyard ambience. That'll be fun. Alright, one more. It looks like it's not a very long one, so I can do it. This one's a bit loud. Chapter 5, The College. Part of the town we lived in seemed dreamed up and fractured and modern. Tilted buildings spaced widely apart with facades that resembled cascading ribbons, and concrete slabs fluttering over one another, and electronic signs wrapped around the buildings. And there were gigantic liquid crystal display screens, and zip strips quoting stock prices and delivering the day's headlines. And neon decorated the courthouse, and a jumbotron TV was perched above the Bloomingdales that took up 4 blocks of downtown. But beyond this district, the town also boasted a 2,000-acre nature preserve and horse farms and 2 golf courses, and there were more children's bookstores than there were Barnes and Nobles. My route to the college ran past numerous playgrounds and a baseball field, and on Main Street, where I stopped to buy a Starbucks latte, there were a variety of gourmet food stores, a first-class cheese shop, a row of pastries. I hate when these words are split on the page. Patisseries, and a friendly pharmacist who filled my Klonopin and Xanax prescriptions, an understated Cineplex, and a family-run hardware store, and all the surrounding streets were lined with magnolia and dogwood and cherry trees. At a stoplight festooned with fresh flowers, I watched a chipmunk climb a telephone pole where I sipped my non-fat latte. The latte revived me to the point excuse me, to the point where my hangover seemed like something that had happened last week. And I was suddenly, inexplicably, content as I drove through the town's shady streets. I passed a potato field. I passed horses grazing outside a barn. At the campus gates, the security guard tipped his hat to me as I raised my latte, acknowledging him. The first time I spotted the cream-colored 450 SL was on that warm, clear Halloween afternoon. It sat at the curb just outside the faculty parking lot, and I smiled as I passed it in recognition of the fact that it was the same make and color of the car my father had driven in the late 70s, a car I'd inherited when I turned 16. This one was a convertible as well, and the intriguing coincidence brought a brief rush of memories. A freeway, sun glinting off the hood, staring out the windshield at the twisting roads of Mulholland while the Go-Go's blared from the stereo, the top down and palm trees swaying above me. I made nothing of it at the time. There were plenty of rich kids at the college, and a car like that wasn't necessarily out of place. So the memories vanished once I parked in my designated space, lifted the stack of paperbacks off my short story collection, The Informers, off the passenger seat, and headed toward my office, which was in a small and charming red barn that overlooked the campus. The building was, in fact, called the Barn. Still smiling to myself, I realized that my sole reason for being here today was that my office was the only place Amy Light would meet me now, under the auspices of a student-teacher counseling session. Even though she wasn't my student, I wasn't her teacher, and no counseling was planned. We had attempted a single tryst at her off-campus apartment, but there was an obnoxious cat inhabiting it that I was deeply allergic to. On the steps of a library sheathed in metal and glass, hungover students were catching rays. Walking across the quad, I stopped to help tap a keg and sneak a beer in front of a new art installation. Soccer players in DKNY sportswear loped across the quad's green field, and except for a few goths sitting beneath the overhang of Commons, where I dropped off the stack of the Informers, placing it on the free with student ID table, everyone looked as if they'd stepped out of an Abercrombie and Fitch catalog. It all resembled something extremely enticing, and again I was taken back into the past to my years at Camden. In fact, the whole campus, the vibe, the placement of the dorms, the design of the main buildings reminded me of Camden, even though this was just another small, inexpensive liberal arts college in the middle of nowhere. Yo, Mr. Ellis, great party last night. What's going down? Someone called out. It was a jock from my writing class who had a modicum of talent. Yo, I'm down. I'm very down, Jesse. I called back good-naturedly and then added as an afterthought, rock on. Students kept calling out as I walked to the barn, thanking me for the party none of them had been invited to, but that they all had apparently attended nonetheless. And so my professorial smile was followed by their gratified laughter. There was also the nervous-looking Jewish student, David Abramowitz, I noticed as I passed, and who, I must confess, I was a little into. The compliments about the rad party kept rolling in, and I returned friendly waves to students I'd never even seen before. On the door of my office was a note from a student I never heard of, canceling an appointment I didn't recall having made, apologizing for her outburst in last Wednesday's class. I tried hard to remember the student and what the outburst had been about, but couldn't come up with anything, because the class was a sleepwalk, so laid back and comfortable and informal that even the suggestion of an outburst was worrisome. In class, I always tried to sound lighthearted and encouraging, but since I was so famous and probably closer to their age than any other teacher, though I was completely autonomous from the rest of the faculty and really didn't know for sure, my students looked at me in awe. While critiquing their stories, I tried to ignore their expressions of fear and alarm. I sat down at my desk and immediately flipped open my laptop and started making up a dream to feed Dr. Kim, the diminutive Korean shrink my wife found through our couples counselor, Dr. Faida. Dr. Kim, a strict Freudian and a big believer in how the unconscious expressed itself in dream imagery, wanted me to bring in a new dream every week so we could interpret it. But because her accent was so thick that half the time I had no idea what she was saying, and the added fact that I was no longer having dreams, these sessions were almost unbearable. Did I just say unbearable? Unbearable. We gotta finish this chapter. I'm coming apart at the seams. But Jane insisted on and was paying for them, so it was easier to endure these hours than face the hassles of not showing up. Besides, this charade was my only means of keeping the Klonopin and Xanax prescriptions up to date, and without them, I was a goner. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim was catching on, becoming more suspicious with each new made-up dream, but my assignment was to bring in one today, so while waiting for Amy Light to arrive and hopefully undress, I dutifully concentrated on what kind of dream would be burbling in my unconscious at this point. Glancing at my watch, I saw this had to be quick. I had to make up the dream, type it up, and print it out, and then, after somehow having sex with Amy Light, dash over to Dr. Kim's office by 3. Today, water, plane crash, being chased by a lively badger. Remember, animals were not my friends. I was naked on the plane, the lively badger was also on the plane, and maybe its name was Jane. When I looked up, a student had appeared in the doorway and was staring at me sheepishly. There was nothing unusual about him at first glance. Tall, handsome in a generic way, a lean face, slightly chiseled, thick reddish brown hair, very tightly cropped, a backpack slung over his shoulders. He was wearing jeans and an antique olive green Armani sweater with the designer's emblem, an eagle, on it. Antique because it was a sweater I had once owned when I was a college student. He was holding a Starbucks cup and seemed more alert than the squinty-eyed slackers that populated the campus. And though I couldn't place him, I know I'd seen him before, so I was intrigued. Plus, he was holding a copy of my first novel, Less Than Zero, which made me stand up and say hello. The boy seemed almost shocked that I had acknowledged him and was suddenly incapable of saying anything until I quickly spoke again. That's a wonderful novel you're holding. Oh, yeah. Hi. I hope I'm not bothering you. No, not at all. Come in. Come in. He looked away and blushed deeply, and then shuffled into the office and carefully sat down in the chair across the desk from me. Well, I'm a big fan, Mr. Ellis. Isn't there a law against formality at this place? I said with an expression of mock distaste, hoping to relax him since he was sitting so rigidly in the chair. Call me Brett. I paused. And have we met before? I'm Clayton, and I'm a freshman here, and I don't think so, the boy said. I just wanted to know if you could sign this for me. His hands trembled slightly as he held up the book. Of course, I'd be happy to. I studied him as he handed me the book, which was in pristine condition. I opened it to the copyright page and saw it was a first edition, which made the book I was holding an extremely rare and valuable copy. I have class in a couple of minutes, so... He gestured at himself. Oh, of course, I won't keep you long. I set the book down and searched my desk for a pen. So, Clayton, I assume all your friends call you Clay. He stared at me, and then, understanding what I was getting at, grinned and said, Yeah. He waved a hand at the book, like Clay in the novel. That's the connection I made, I said, opening a drawer. Is there another? I found a pen and then looked up. He was staring at me questioningly. That's the right one. You were correct, I assured him. But then I couldn't help it. You look very familiar. He just shrugged. Well, what are you majoring in? I asked. I want to be a writer. It seemed hard for him to admit this. Did you apply to my writing course? I'm a freshman. It's only open to juniors and seniors. Well, I could have pulled a few strings, I said delicately. Based on what? He asked, a snap in his voice. I realized that I was flirting with him and suddenly looked back at the book and put the pen in my hand, embarrassed for myself. I'm not really any good, he offered, sitting up, noting the sudden, subtle shift in the room's vibe. Well, neither are any of my other students, so you'd fit right in. I laughed dryly. He did not. My parents... Again, he hesitated. Well, my dad, actually. He wanted me to go to business school, and so... Ah, yes. The age-old dilemma. Clayton purposefully checked his watch, another gesture that indicated he needed to go. You can just sign my name. I mean, your name. He stood up. Are you working on anything? I asked gently as I signed my name with an uncharacteristic flourish on the title page. Well, I have part of a novel done. I handed him back the book. Well, if you're interested in showing me anything... I left the offer hanging there, waiting for him to accept. At that point, I realized where I'd seen Clayton before. He was at the Halloween party last night. He was dressed as Patrick Bateman. I'd seen him when I was looking out Sarah's window as he disappeared into the darkness of Elsinore Lane. I breathed in. Something caught in me and I shivered. He was putting the book in his backpack when I asked, So, you weren't at the party my wife and I threw last night? He stiffened and said, No, I wasn't. This was answered so genuinely that I couldn't register if he was lying or not. Plus, if he'd crashed the party, why admit it now? Really? I thought I saw you there. I couldn't help but keep pressing. No, wasn't me. He just stood in front of my desk waiting. I realized I needed to say something that would get him moving. Well, it was nice meeting you, Clayton. Yeah, you too. I held out a hand. He abruptly shook it and looked away, mumbling his thanks as I heard footsteps coming down the hall. Clayton heard footsteps too, and without saying anything else, turned to leave my office. But Amy Light bumped into him in the doorway, and they glanced at each other briefly before Clayton rushed away. Who was that? Amy asked casually, swaying in. I walked over to the door, still slightly dazed from the encounter, and watched as Clayton disappeared down an empty corridor. I stood there trying to figure out why he had lied about being at the party last night. Well, he was shy. Well, he hadn't been invited. Well, he wanted to come. Whatever. Amy spoke again. Was that a student of yours? Yeah, yeah, I said, closing the door. Very interesting young man whose allotted 7 minutes had just expired. Amy was leaning against my desk, facing me, and wearing an alluring summer dress, and she knew exactly what the response to an alluring summer dress at the end of October would be. A carnal promise. I immediately walked up to her, and she pushed herself up until she was sitting on the desk, and then spread her legs, and as I walked between them, she wrapped them around my waist, straddling me as I stood looking down at her. This was all extremely encouraging. A sycophant? She asked demurely. No, then he would have received an allotted 10 minutes. We kissed. So democratic, she sighed. Hey, it's part of my teacher's oath. Kissing her, I kept tasting lip gloss, which took me back to high school and the girls I dated when flavored lip gloss was the rage. And I was making out in a chaste lounge next to a black-bottomed pool in Encino, and I was tan and wearing a puka shell necklace, and Foreigner's Feels Like the First Time was playing, and her name was Blair, and the delicious, slightly fruity odor of bubblegum was drifting into the office now, and I was lost until I realized Amy had pulled back and was staring up at me. My hand was at the nape of her neck. I just saw Alvin, she said. I sighed. Alvin Mendelssohn was her thesis instructor. I had never met him. And what did Alvin say? She sighed too. Why are you wasting your time on this? Why does your advisor hate me so much? I have my speculations. Would you care to share them with me? I was gently running a fingertip up and down her forearm. I lightly stroked her wrist. He thinks you're part of the problem. Jesus, what an asshole. I kissed her again, my hand's innate sense of direction leading them to her breasts. She nudged the hands away. How's the house? Not too wrecked, I hope, she asked, as I pressed my erection against her thigh, which she tensed. I was becoming more insistent and about to push away the laptop and lay her down on the desk when she asked, Does Jane know about us? I moved away from her slightly, but she grinned and kept me in position with her legs. Why do you ask? I said. Why are you asking this now? She was looking at me strangely last night. I moved in again, kissing her neck and then her inner arm. She now had goosebumps. It's just the lighting. Forget about it. Amy leaned away from me again. I got the definite impression that she was studying me. I sighed and stood up straight. Are we ever going to do it or what? Oh, God. Because I, for one, do not think I'm too young. She laughed loudly, throwing her head back. No, it's not that. You're becoming very quickly the biggest cock tease I've ever met in my life, and it's not funny, Amy. I grabbed her hand and moved it toward my crotch. You want to feel how not funny it is? I shouldn't be involved with you for any number of reasons, she said, sitting up, but I wouldn't budge from my position. She kept sighing. Look, number one is you're married. For only 3 months, I wailed. Brett. I moved in again, burying my face in her neck. Married guys live longer. There's no research that indicates being married is a good idea. I moved down to my knees until I was staring between her parted thighs. I placed a hand beneath her dress, feeling the navel ring in the middle of her soft, tanned stomach. My hand glided across her lower abdomen and down around her hip bones. The little slope at the base of her spine, right above her ass. I rubbed that indentation delicately, massaging it with very gentle, circular motions. And then my hands moved to the spot where her ass cheeks met her thighs. My hands started moving toward her panties and the uncharted territory that lay beneath them. She tried to close her thighs, but I gripped them tightly, holding them open. Straining, I managed to say, I read a study in a magazine somewhere. She struggled to close her thighs. My teeth were clenched. Something connecting coital frequency to lifespan. I finally let go, panting. That is such bullshit, she said, laughing. Look, I'm trying to trigger a sexual response in you, so why aren't you convulsing with pleasure? Oh God, my own allergies are actually killing me. She relaxed as I stood up and we kissed again. I became lost in her once more. God, what are you wearing? I murmured. That smell, it takes me back. To where? I was licking her mouth. Just like back, the past. I'm re-experiencing my whole adolescence. Just with this lip gloss? Yeah, I sighed. It's like those little tangerines in Proust. You mean Madeline's? Yeah, like those little tangerines. How did you get this job? Shapely legs. I was feeling her stomach again, pulling gently on the ring piercing her navel. Can I get one of those too? We could have matching navel rings. Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah, it would really set off those abs of yours. Are you talking about my six pack? I think I'm talking about your, keg. You're very sexy, baby, but I'm equally hot. And then, as usual, it stopped. This time it was mutual. She had places to go. I had to print out a dream and head over to Dr. Kim's. While we were getting ready to leave the office, Amy said something. That boy who was in here earlier. Yeah, do you know him? She paused. No, but he looked familiar. Yeah, I thought so too. Did you see him at the party last night? I asked while the printer started cranking out my assignment. I'm not sure, but he reminded me of someone. Yeah, he went as Patrick Bateman. He was the guy in the Armani suit. Very creepy. Brett, I have news for you. You were so wasted I don't think you could have recognized anybody by the time the party hit full force. I shrugged, slipped the dream into my jacket, and picked up a few stories students had left at the bin by my door. It was quiet. Amy was thinking about something else while she lit a cigarette. Yeah? What is it? I asked. I'm gonna be late. It's weird you said Patrick Bateman, she said. Why? Because I thought he looked a little like Christian Bale. We were both silent for a long time because Christian Bale was the actor that had played Patrick Bateman in the film version of American Psycho. But he also looked like you, Amy said, give or take 20 years. I started shivering again. Back in the parking lot, the cream-colored 450 SL was no longer there. I noticed. End of chapter 5. Crad, you missed all the context needed to make that line make sense, unfortunately. I'm sorry to tell you. Wow. I have spent this entire hour and a half getting absolutely colonized by my own allergies. And I think I lost the ability to breathe through my nose in real time as we read. So, I guess I need to go to fucking bed. I am all of a sudden, yuck. I'm sure you can hear it. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Sorry that I was a little bit under the weather. I had a good time as always. We got from chapter 3 to chapter 6. That's where we'll be starting off next week.